Hi, hello, I'm Sam Harrison. I read, review and discuss fantasy and science fiction books, and today I'll be discussing whether you should be a mood reader or you should have a TBR. I'm not actually going to be doing that. I'm going to be talking mostly from my point of view, how I feel about mood reading and how I feel about TBRs. So over the summer I did a mood reading experiment. So from when my daughter was born in May through June, July and August, I did a mood reading experiment. And basically my rule was I had to read my monthly Wheel of Time books, which I did not always do. I think I did it 2 out of 3 months. I had to read a Wheel of Time book every month, but the other books were completely up to me. I still wanted to keep up my fantasy sci-fi cadence, but what I wanted to do was to take a little bit of the obligation out of my reading. So I love reading stuff that I think that you guys will be interested in. One of the big things that I think about with the channel is that you're giving me your time, so I should provide you with some value. And one of the things that I think about a lot is, am I providing the value that you guys as a community, as an audience are looking for? And so a lot of that time in terms for me was originally built around TBR videos. So they would be like the most important video I made that month. I would be going, right, I'm going to make this TBR video. It's going to set my agenda for the month. And then that agenda will be something that I follow, and fans can watch along, read along and see how I read and feel involved on that sort of level. And I had zero issues with that. I always enjoyed everything I read. I enjoyed the planning stage of it. I enjoyed feeling the kind of achievement of ticking stuff off of the list, And then I tried mood reading. And one of the really big things that I liked about mood reading was sometimes with a TBR, I would shuffle the books around. So I used to plan 6 books, and I would usually read most months between 4 and 6. So most months I would get at least 4. I think there was a couple of months where I did 1 or 2 books, like 2 or 3 even books this year, but most months I managed 4 books. And so there'd always be a couple left off the end. And one of the big things that would happen with those would be that I would be like, well, I'm not really in the mood for the first binding now, so I'll shuffle that to the end of the TBR and I'll read something else that I'm more in the mood for. And then what would happen is I'd be like, well, I might, for example, read 5 books and then the book I wasn't in the mood for was the only one left. Or I might read all the sci-fi that I was in the mood for, and the fantasy that I wasn't in the mood for would be the only thing left. Or I would put a book on a TBR, not feel like I fancied reading it, but then not want to put it on the next month's TBR because I wanted to have new content to discuss in TBR and wrap-up videos. So I wasn't just going, I'm going to talk about this again, I'm going to talk about this again, Like I did like 4 weekly wrap-ups where I talked about the return to Edan, and I had actually mentioned it a bunch of times across the year as wanting to go into the TBR. I think it was on like 6 TBRs before it actually got read, and now it's my book of the year. And I think that if I had not felt obligated to read other stuff, I might have read this sooner. Although, would it have been my book of the year if I'd read it now? I don't know. Anyway, so I don't know if you can hear Barry, but he's purring like a motorbike down here. He's literally sat in my lap, having a lovely time. Off camera though, so you can't see it, but Gus is here. He's having a great time. So, yeah. So one of the big things that I was noticing was that books were getting talked about and then put off. So if I didn't get to a book in that TBR month, the likelihood was that I wouldn't come back to it for several months. So this happened a lot with Return to Idan, probably the prime example for that. I think I read Prophet of Idan in like January or February, and Return to Idan was on like the next TBR, but then I didn't read it until literally September. And I want to still put that focus on independent books. I want to still talk about indie books. But then also, I spent all of September reading Self-Pub again. So I did Self-Pub September, the same as I did last year. And I will say, the channel did quite poorly during that month. So one of the big things I think I'm going to try and do next year is just split the Self-Pub out over the year. Because there are just some people who aren't interested in self-pub books, no matter if they are my book of the year or they are some of the best books I've read. So in fact, if Return to Idan is my book of the year this year, that will be 2 years in a row that a self-pub book has been my book of the year, because last year it was Of War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill. And there's another Ryan Cahill book out next year, so might be 3 years in a row. Don't know about that, dog. Ryan's, let's see if we can nail it for next year. Okay, I think, yeah, we want a three-peat. So one of the things that I'm finding with TBRs, and this video might sound really negative against TBRs, but I think that until I started mood reading, I didn't know that the TBR was as negative an experience. So I did a TBR, in fact, for last month for Self-Pub September. That was going to be my first month back onto regular TBRs, and I think now that I'm not going to do that. I've got a new theory of how I'm going to go forward with my reading, which is what I'm going to do is basically build a massive Excel sheet, which is every series that I'm reading and then any standalone books. And I am just going to, when I finish a book, basically spin the wheel, and if I like the sound of that book, just read the next book in that series or the next standalone. So that will be fun in that I can get you guys involved in the spinning of the wheel. We can do that as like a YouTube short. I know that Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews does his like spin of the wheel for Patreon, and I really enjoy that. I watch those every single time, even though they're literally the same video where he's like, and we're gonna read Justice of Kings, and like he does that literally every time. Like it's really funny, but I enjoy that. And what that will be able to do as well is I'm still going to do that month of subscriber TBR, but the way that I will do that is that when I feel like I have some headway and I have that free month, which might end up being January next year, sorry subscribers, I know I said it was going to be October, but everything is shifting for me at the moment, and I'm looking at the not the TBR, but I'm looking at like buddy reads I've agreed to do and thinking like, oh well, I need to finish, I need to get further up to date with Wheel of Time, and then on top of that, in November I'm going to be reading Elantris with Andrew Watson, and I would really like to read Fury of the Gods. I've got an arc of Fury of the Gods and I would like to read it so that it is around launch time. It's not going to be for launch time, but within a couple of weeks of launch, I would really like to have read that so that I can be a part of the conversation with everyone else who's reading it when it comes out. So there's a lot going on in terms of stuff at the end of this year, and I have just started planning on a really big video, which is gonna be a lot of work and a lot of rereading. I'll be rereading 3 novels and multiple novellas, so that's going to be a big portion of my reading as well. So it's going to be difficult for me to do a full month of subscriber reading, which sucks, because I had wanted to do it basically as soon as I had hit 1,000 subs, because it was my 1,000 sub celebration. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to work out. But so one of the things that I've noticed is that these TBRs were taking a little bit of the fun out of picking my next read in some cases. So basically, I think it's really fun to finish your book and then be like, oh, what am I going to read next? And have tons of choices. But what I was actually doing was getting that, ooh, what am I going to read next sort of vibe once a month instead of, you know, maybe 6 or 7 times a month. So when you do a TBR, at the end of the month, you look at around, you go, right, here's the 6 books I might read next month. Whereas if you don't do a TBR, you finish a book and you go, right, I've got 45 books in this house. What are we going to read? Or, you know, 300 books on Kindle. What are we going to read? Hey, don't scratch me. He wants more attention. So a lot of my thought process in terms of binning off TBRs, which is what I am going to be doing going forward. I'm not going to be doing TBRs. I'm literally just going to be spinning the wheel when I finish a book and telling you guys what I'm reading next. So with TBR stuff, we won't be doing those anymore. I really liked the Hardy's Books video about this. It's one of the very first video theirs that I watched, which was where they talked about MBRs, which is might be read. And I think it's quite interesting looking at the way that other booktubers handle their schedules. So all the biggest booktubers do a monthly TBR, and I get that. Well, I say all the biggest, all the like up and coming booktubers, I would say, do no, that's actually a lie. No, it's a lie. A lot of booktubers don't do any sort of TBR content. But a lot of the ones that I watch do, which is probably why I was doing it. So you've got people like Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews, who does his TBR and he knows exactly how many words he can read a day. And so he could literally go like, and on the 18th, I'm going to be starting this book, which is mad. And that's never going to be me, guys. I'm just not that consistent or organised. I'm pretty consistent in being able to read every day, but the consistency of speed is completely weird. So like, for example, Return to Edan, right? That's a book that I've very recently finished, 650 pages, and it took me almost a month. Path of Daggers, the next Wheel of Time book that I started on Friday, I'm already over 200 pages in. So, you know, if I can read 200 pages of Robert Jordan in a weekend, no problem, but I can't read 200 pages of Return to Edan. Interestingly, I probably could have read 200 pages of Prophet of Edan or Way of Edan, but Return to Edan is so different and experimental and interesting that I think that it's harder to binge it, if that makes sense. So yeah, basically consistency in terms of reading speed isn't up there for me to be able to plan. And like I was saying before, one of the really big things that was, I don't want to say stressing me out because it wasn't causing me any stress, but I was getting some kind of negative vibes from myself for saying I was going to read a thing and then not doing it. And then the next month being like, sorry guys, I'm taking it off the schedule. So I've had Sword of Kaigen on my TBR like 10 times and I've not cracked it open. And I really want to read it. I have a lovely special edition from Page and Wick that I really want to read, but I've literally never cracked it open. And it's not because I don't think the book's going to be good or that I don't think it's going to work for me. I have put it in a couple of themed month TBRs and then it hasn't come to pass. I've read a similar book in 1 month and been like, oh, I don't actually want to read Sword of Kaigen now. I don't want to read like 2 Asian inspired fantasies in the same month. And yeah, there's a lot going on in terms of the way that TBRs end up actually being quite a negative experience for me. And it's not something that I think is going to be the case for everyone, because, you know, if you are into the organisation and the way that TBRs work, you'll have a great time. But I think that for some people, like myself, it ends up being not as nice an experience as just simply reading the next thing as your mood takes you. And one of the things that I've really liked since finishing Self-Pub September is I have been kind of just reading as I go on a roll, trying to catch up with Wheel of Time. And I've just made the decision that I was going to right, I'm just going to read 2 Wheel of Time books this month. I'm not going to read 1 like I normally would on the TBR. I'm just going to read 2, and then if I've got any space left in October, I'll pick some other stuff. And that has been a really fun and enjoyable experience for me. I don't know how long Elantris is going to take for me to read either, because I find Sanderson very easy and quick to read. However, I do also hear that this is his weakest book, and I don't know if weak Sanderson is going to be as easy to read. Because like Cytonic, which I felt was quite a weak book in the Skyward series, I feel like that took me longer than the rest. So honestly, no clue. And I think that one of the big things with mood reading, so there are negatives in that when you mood read, I think one of the big things is that you can leave series behind. So you can be like, oh, I'm not in the mood for reading the next Powder Mage series book right now. And then it doesn't get read for a year, you know. I've not really been in the mood for Sun Eater for a while, and so I've been keeping it off of the TBR. But now, you know, I've got 3 books to read in the Sun Eater series, and the final book is out next year. And I'm like, I kind of want to be up to date when the final book comes out so I can read it along with everyone. And then it's like, well, actually, I might need to start prioritizing Sun Eater. And now I might have to, this is the wrong term, but I might have to start reading Sun Eater maybe when I'm not in the mood for that kind of story. And that is going to mean the experience might not be as strong. So that is a big negative for mood reading, in that if you want to hit certain milestones, mood reading can actually be pretty negative in terms of helping you towards that. Over the summer when I was mood reading, and there was a month where I did not read a Wheel of Time book, that also was a bit of a failing. I think with mood reading also, you can more easily get distracted. So when I have done mood reading stuff in the past, it has been more easy without feeling like I had the pressure's the wrong term, but where I didn't feel like I had the next thing to get onto. It felt a lot easier to maybe go like, well, I might spend this evening's reading time playing a video game, instead of what I often do, which is like read for an hour or so, and then when my brain starts to like be able to pay less attention to the reading, then I switch over and I'll play a video game until I'm ready to go to bed or whatever. Whereas when I'm mood reading, it kind of trends the other way, you know? So it's a really interesting thing. And I think that for some people, mood reading will be the only way that they can run it. And I know that, like, for example, the Hardy's guys, they're very into their mood reading. They will even put books down in the middle of the book and pick up something else, whilst not DNFing. And for me, if I put a book down, 99% of the time, I'm DNFing it, or I'm coming back to it at a much later date and probably rereading what I've already read. And so you get a lot of that. And then you've got people who can only do a TBR. So I was chatting to a friend of mine yesterday who's a YouTuber, and they were like, yeah, I have every book I'm going to read until the end of the year planned out, and that's the only way that I can do it. And the other thing as well is that, as you guys know, one of my big plans for 2025 is to not spend any money on books. So my process is going to be that I'm going to be trying to read the books I already own. So that'll be a main priority, is reading stuff I already own. If it's a new book, I'll be looking to try and either get advanced reader copies or wait and get it from the library. And finally, my final, like, if I cannot do any of those things, I'll be buying books, but I will be making sure to buy them only when I've earned enough money from YouTube to offset that purchase. So in terms of my actual pocket money, my spending money, nothing has changed. So that is the goal for 2025, to be at, when I get to the end of the year, basically at like 0 spent on books. That is the idea. Whether that is possible or not, I don't know, but I'm literally looking at a stack of like 7 books that I know I want to read. So that's like probably a month and a half. If you count the fact that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Wheel of Time books left. No, yeah, 6 Wheel of Time books to read. That's a month. I'm not going to read them all in the same month. So yes, while there are, I'm not going to fully ban myself from buying new books, because there's things like, there's a new Dresden coming out next year. There's a new Bound and the Broken coming out next year. If neither of those were coming out next year, I could probably take the entire year off of buying books in total. But those two, I pretty much 100% know I want to read the day they release, or ideally in advance. When I do get advanced reader copies, I also tend to purchase the Kindle copy when the book comes out, especially if I didn't get to that advanced reader copy in advance. That's probably what I'll be doing with Fury of the Gods. I just like to, especially if it's a good book, especially if, like I say, I didn't get to it in advance, I do like to pay for the books that I get advanced reader copies of, just so that my, like, I don't know, it feels like conscience is a bit more clear. I don't know. Hopefully people watch my videos and buy the books that I talk about. But if you don't do that, I want the author to have at least made one sale through me, you know? So yeah, not TBRing will make that a lot easier, I think, because I can basically just go like, well, this hold is out at the library, so I can read this book now, so I'm just going to read that book now. And utilize the library a lot more. I finally got the digital library app stuff set up on my books e-reader, which is my main e-reader of choice. So I will be doing a lot of that next year, I think, is reading ebooks from the library, which I don't really do at the moment because my local library is terrible, but I've been able to join some that have non-residential memberships, which has been really good. And yeah, so from now on, this channel is probably a TBR free place. The one thing that I do want to carry on doing is a monthly buddy read of a long series. At the moment, it's Wheel of Time. Next year, when Wheel of Time is done, I'm going to be starting Malazan, ideally with Matt. If Matt's not available or doesn't want to, then I will solo bolo or try and recruit somebody else to read along. And then after Malazan, I think it's Realm of the Eldlings. I think that's the one. I do also have a ton of series I really want to catch up on. Like, I want to read Powder Mage trilogy. I want to finish that. I want to read the next whatchamacall, Area X book from Jeff Vandermeer. I really want to get back to Red Rising to read those multi-POV second trilogy. Well, quadrilogy now. So yeah, loads of stuff I want to read. Too many books, too little time. And I will be starting the Dragonbone Chair, Memory, Sorrow and Thorn soon-ish. I'm not sure whether I'm going to read it at the same time as Wheel of Time, but I'm looking at this beautiful book on my shelf and I kind of want to read it. So that's been a long and winding conversation about TBR versus mood reading. I would love to know if you have made it through this incredibly random conversation, whether you enjoy mood reading or you prefer to keep a TBR. Also, let me know if you're organised in other aspects of your life, because that could colour whether that works or not for you. Also, like this video if you've liked it. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't before. I read and review and discuss fantasy and science fiction books, and I have a great time doing it, and I love getting new members into the community, and every single subscription means a lot to me. Thanks so much for watching, and I will speak to you tomorrow.